Hello, friends. On paper, many professionals today look very successful. They're working, earning, showing up, achieving, even smiling. But behind the scenes, many are mentally exhausted, emotionally disconnected, constantly overwhelmed, and running on survival mode. So the question is, are people really underperforming or are they simply burnt out? This episode is part of our Mindfully Yours mini series, The Human Side of Work, where we explore the emotional and psychological realities that often go unseen in today's workplaces. Across this series, we'll be looking at burnout, emotional exhaustion, workplace relationships, and what it really takes to build healthier, more aware work environments. And we begin with something that many professionals are experiencing today but not always recognizing: burnout. Hello, friends. On paper, many professionals today look successful. They're working, earning, showing up, achieving, even smiling. But behind the scenes, many are mentally exhausted, emotionally disconnected, constantly overwhelmed, and running on survival mode. So the question is, are people really underperforming or are they simply burnt out? In today's episode of Mindfully Yours, we are talking about something every workplace is seeing but not fully addressing: burnout, emotional fatigue, unhealthy work patterns, and why high performers are often the ones silently struggling the most. And to help us unpack this deeply, I'm joined by Dr. Sanju Gambhir, psychotherapist, counselor, and mental wellness expert for decades of experience helping people navigate stress, emotional overload, and the inner conflicts that often go unseen. Dr. Sanju Gambhir, welcome to Tipsy Talks Presents Mindfully Yours. Welcome, ma'am.
Thank you so much.
All right. So let me start with the most basic but important question. What does burnout actually look like today? Because many people use this word very casually, but they may not
Right.
really understand what they are experiencing and how is it different from just stress or being tired after work every day.
That's an excellent question. And, people really need to understand it well because if you wake up tired, you feel emotionally flat at work, or you are struggling to take care about things that you initially used to do very easily, or maybe you can't recover no matter how much you are resting. It's not normal stress. That's burnout. So, burnout is just not tiredness, it's a state of emotional, mental, and physical exhaustion caused by prolonged, unmanaged stress. And so, what happens over here is you start feeling overwhelmed. You feel there is too much of demand on you. You're feeling helpless, or maybe you are even feeling disconnected. So, research in 2026 it shows that burnout is evolving in various forms and cause because of factors like technology overload, blurred work life boundaries, and economic insecurities. So, burnout needs to be recognized. One thing that you really asked and which people really should understand is how is it different from stress or feeling tired after work? So, when you are tired, being tired means after work, your body needs some rest. When you are stressed, it just means that your mind is overloaded with too much to handle. But burnout, it goes much deeper. That's when you feel emotionally drained, disconnected, and actually you start losing the sense of purpose in whatever you are doing. So, if I put it in simple words, tiredness needs sleep. Stress basically needs relief, and burnout needs reflection and change.
All right.
Stress makes you overactive, burnout just shuts you down.
Now, tell me, Dr.
Absolutely.
Gambhir, can someone be functioning absolutely normally on the outside and be totally emotionally burnt out on the inside? Is that possible?
Absolutely. Today people, when if I look at it, people say that I am emotionally burnt out, or you know, uh, this is something very common. If we look at it, many people appear to be functioning normally on the outside, while emotionally they are burnt out on the inside. And this is called high functioning burnout. On the outside, they look like they are meeting up with all the deadlines, they are showing up with the family, doing everything that the family needs, they're even smiling, they are socializing. But internally, they are feeling emotionally drained, they are detached, numb, disconnected, and they are exhausted in a way that even when they rest, it does not get fixed.
So, can you share some of the early signs which people tend to actually dismiss or normalize in the initial stages of this emotional burnout as a form of denial, one can say?
Absolutely. So, the earlier signs are generally not always loud or visible, and they can be easily dismissed by people. Like, signs like you're feeling constantly tired, or you are not feeling too connected with people, or maybe a person might be very irritable, might feel numb. Uh, some things that gave pleasure initially, that where you felt there was joy in life or things that mattered, you lose that joy in that. Constantly, you're feeling mentally tired, even after you've rested, or you're mentally switched off.
Right.
There's loss of empathy or motivation. People might just normalize it as, oh, this is a busy phase of my life. They might not understand, thinking that there's too much of workload, there are too many things happening. But actually, these are the first warning signs of burnout.
So, if I can put it in simple words, burnout is not always a collapse. Sometimes it's a person who's still coping, but no longer feeling fully present in their own life. And what's interesting is
Absolutely.
that burnout often hits the people who are seen as the most dependable, the ones who rarely complain, rarely slow down, and always seem to manage everything and anything around them. Okay, so my
True.
question is, why are high performers, Dr. Gambhir, often more vulnerable to burnout than the rest?
That's another wonderful question, because high performers, they don't just work hard. They tie their self worth. Now, this is very important. They tie their self worth to how well they perform. So they push themselves through exhaustion, they ignore the early signs, and they rarely slow down. So burnout basically builds very quietly behind success. It's not just about working hard, it's not about, it's actually not knowing when to stop. That's when burnout happens.
Why do sincere people then, if you say this, then why do sincere, responsible, dependable professionals, as we would like to call them, often find it so hard to admit? In the first place, that is, I think, the first sign that towards remedy to the solution to the problem is that they are struggling. Why do they hate to admit that they are struggling?
Because for the sincere, responsible people, their identity is built around being dependable. They are the ones others rely on. So, for them, it's very difficult to admit that they are struggling, right? They can, they inside, they feel that if they are people who are, there are people relying on them, they might just let them down,
Right.
right? That's one thing that goes on in their head. They also tend to have internal standards. So instead of saying that I need help, they're, in their own heads, they're telling themselves, I should be able to handle this. So they're not even ready to take the help. And over time, what happens is that they normalize their own stress, right? And they suppress their emotions and they keep pushing, often until burnout actually forces them to pause. So it's
Right.
really important for them to understand that everything is not, they cannot handle everything, and that they really need to slow down.
Right, right. And does it have to do with the perfectionism too? Because and the need to always stay on top of things, ahead of the curve, as they say. I mean, and that's considered
Yes.
as a sign of efficiency these days. Like this guy is always on the ball, always ahead of the curve. Does that being perpetually on the ball, it actually exhausts people and drive them towards emotional burnout?
Absolutely. Perfectionism actually keeps raising the bar. So nothing ever feels like it's done or it is good enough. And the need to stay on top of everything means that the mind is never truly switching off,
Right.
right? They are constantly checking, fixing, anticipating, even when they're supposed to be resting.
All right.
So the mind is never quiet. Even when they are in bed, they are sleeping, the mind is ticking. That's the reason over time that quiet mental pressure it becomes so exhausting because they're not only working hard, they are thinking hard all the
Right.
time.
Okay. And we've also seen that, often before people fully burn out, something else begins to weaken quietly inside their boundaries. Why do so many
Yeah.
professionals know they need boundaries but still struggle to practice them?
Because knowing about boundaries is intellectual, but actually practicing them is emotional,
Right.
right? So we don't know how to set our boundaries. And professionals, they are generally struggling because they have a number of fears. Number one, they have a fear of disappointing others. They have a fear within themselves that they might just miss out on some opportunities. They have a fear of being seen as less committed. So even when they know they need their limits, they override that knowledge to meet the expectations.
Right.
So guilt, habit, and identity keep them, saying yes all the time, even though internally they wish to say no.
Right. I wanted to ask you this. One of the biggest melees which is plaguing the so-called high-performing professionals is the reluctance to say no. So,
Yes.
is it more so from guilt inside or self-respect?
Again, a very good question. So these people are generally they are conditioned to equate being good with being available and accommodating.
Right.
Yeah. So when they say no, it doesn't feel like self-respect. It feels like they are disappointing someone or they are falling short of other people's expectations. So here one very important thing is that they need to realize their self-worth because until self-worth shift from pleasing others to respecting myself, that saying no will always feel like guilt even when I think it is the healthiest choice for them. So they have to really understand that it's not that you're not disappointing anybody else, but you need to give yourself that level, that place in your life where you don't feel guilty. The self-respect, very
Right.
important.
And Dr. Gambhir, what can individuals and even workplaces, system as such, the organization as such, do differently before burnout becomes a real serious threat to them?
A very good question, I would say, because this is something people really need to understand. So individually, the key is to notice the early signs. And when you notice the early signs, it's important that you treat it as information and not as weakness. Which means if you're feeling constantly tired, fatigued, and you get easily irritable or you lose joy in things, as I said earlier, you need to just pause. You need to understand these are warning signs. So when you learn to pause, when you learn to set boundaries, and you truly disconnect, right? That is when you are actually going to understand that, or maybe I would say, understand that these are the signals and this is not optional. You need to disconnect. This is at the individual level. Now, at the workplace level, what I feel is it's all about the culture of that wherever organization, whichever organization they are working. Over there, they need to normalize break hours, which is not happening actually. People don't even take lunch at the right time because there are meetings, everything's happening. Along with that, I think even in the organizations, they need to respect offline time because
Right.
that's also not happening.
Right.
Even when the person is offline, They are still, working, somehow connected with the office. Another thing is they're always constantly pressurized. There's a constant urgency. So at workplaces, they need to reduce that constant urgency, and they need to value sustainable performance over non-stop availability, because they need to understand that burnout is not happening all of a sudden. It's building up in environments where exhaustion is quietly accepted as normal.
All right, right.
So
Or
that's something we
I'll
need to
just
change.
quote you. In one of our earliest discussions, you said that
Yeah,
fatigue and emotional burnout are worn as medals today in the corporate workplace.
absolutely. Yes, I remember saying that.
It's taken as a sign of being superior to the others and more relied upon than the others. Now,
Yes,
Dr. Gambhir,
absolutely.
would it be fair to say that many people don't just struggle with time management? The younger this generation, of course, is very clearly, obviously, evidently struggling with time management. But beyond that, they also struggle with emotional permission. Is that true?
Yes, that's actually a very fair way to put it, because many people don't struggle because they don't have time. They struggle because they don't give themselves the permission to use that time differently. So there's a vast difference in that. They also don't give themselves the permission to pause
Right,
without feeling guilty.
right,
They don't give themselves the permission to say no without over explaining themselves. They don't give themselves the permission to rest without feeling unproductive. So even when time is available, emotionally, it's not allowed in their heads.
right.
And that quiet inner restriction is often what keeps people trapped in overload far more than their schedule does. So, as I said earlier, also, the mind is never at rest over here. Yeah, that's
Right.
where something we need to understand.
Right, right. Now, Dr. Gambhir, before we close, now for someone who's watching this episode and who's suddenly realizing that, they may not just be tired, they may actually be burnt out, what is the first
Yeah.
thing you would want them to understand?
So, the first thing that I would want anyone who's listening to this to understand that what you are feeling is not a personal failure, it's a signal. So, don't look at it as a weakness. It doesn't mean you are weak or you are incapable. Burnout just usually means that you have been strong for far too long without even enough recovery, support, or giving yourself that emotional space that you really need. You are human.
Right,
Accept it. So don't rush to fix yourself. Just start by acknowledging it. Because the moment you name it honestly, right? You need to name it for yourself honestly. You will actually stop fighting with your own self. And that's when healing will actually begin.
right, right, right. Now, if I have to summarize this conversation today, Dr. Gambhir, it would be that burnout does not always announce itself loudly. You would agree with me. Sometimes it
Yes,
shows up quietly in the form of emotional fatigue, irritability, numbness, or simply functioning without feeling fully okay. Absolutely, not on top of things. And perhaps that is why
yes,
so many high performers today go unnoticed for so long, because they are still delivering even while they are silently draining inside. And if I have to
yes,
select three key takeaways from this discussion, they would be: number one, burnout is not weakness, it is often prolonged emotional overload. Number two,
yes,
high performers are often the least likely to ask for help. And number three, healthy workplaces are built not just on productivity, but on psychological safety and emotional intelligence. Dr. Sanju Gambhir, thank you so much for bringing such clarity and depth to this conversation today. I'm sure this will resonate with a lot of professionals out there who may be going through this very quietly. Thank you very much.
thank you.
And if this conversation resonated with you personally, don't ignore it. Burnout does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it just becomes your normal. And if you are someone in HR, leadership, learning and development, or part of a workplace that genuinely wants to build emotionally healthier, more resilient teams, conversations like these need to move beyond content and into action. And if you would like structured sessions, wellness conversations, or meaningful workshops for your teams, do reach out to us. This is Mindfully Yours, where we don't just talk about mental wellness, we make it practical, relevant, and human. Till next time, Jai Hind.